If members wish to speak, they should do as normal, raise their hand or indicate using the chat facility. I'll advise members that I will introduce any comfort breaks at appropriate times, but considering the agenda, I don't think that's going to be necessary. So we'll go straight away to Mr. Moody to take the sederant. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Thank you, Provost. Provost Buchanan.
Present.
Deputy Provost Ritchie.
Present.
Councillor Aitchison.
Here.
Councillor Alexander.
Present.
Councillor Balfour.
Present.
Councillor Binney.
Present.
Councillor Bissett.
Present.
Councillor Black.
Present.
Councillor Blackwood.
Present.
Councillor Bowes.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Colley.
Present.
Here. Councillor Coombs.
Here.
Councillor Flynn.
Present.
Councillor Garner.
Present.
Councillor Goldie. Councillor Grant.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Kerr.
Present.
Councillor McHugh. Councillor McCluckie.
Here.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
Present.
Councillor Monroe.
Present.
Councillor Murtagh.
Sure.
Councillor Nicholl.
Present.
Councillor Nimmo.
Present.
Councillor Patrick.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
And Councillor Spears.
Present.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Moody. That takes us to item 2 on the agenda, declaration of interest. Just for clarity. Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Moody. That takes us to item 2 on your agenda, which is declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I will read that out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? None muted. Okay, thank you very much for that. Takes to item 3, which is a revenue budget 2021-22 council tax. It's pages 2 to 11 on your papers, and Mr. Smale will present the report. Thank you, Mr. Smale. Thank you, Mr. Smale. I don't know if he can hear us. Seems to be a problem, I think, Mr. Smale hearing us.
He's on mute, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Just to clarify, we're going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes to ensure that we get Mr. Smale online. Thank you. Just to let you know that we can't overcome the situation with the laptop, but Mr. Smale is going to dial in, so he'll give us a couple of minutes and then he'll give us a report through the telephone. Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Would you speak? Hi, Brian. Would you speak again?
Morning, Provost. Can you hear me?
I can hear you okay. Can members hear Mr. Smale there?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Brian, apologies for the problems, technical problems, but the fact is we're now at your item, which is item 3, the revenue budget 2021-22 council tax. It's pages 2 to 11 on members' agenda papers, and it's your good self that will be presenting the report and available for any questions. So if you'd like to carry on then, Brian, thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning to all, and my deepest apologies for the technical glitches. These things work well when they work well, but when they don't, it's problematic. So again, my apologies. I suspect it's at my end, not your end, but anyway, I'll continue just on audio. So you have before you this morning for this year the unprecedented position for this council of separating the council tax level from the wider revenue budget and determining the council tax in advance. And I think, as you're well aware, this has been triggered by unique circumstances relating to the lack of information being available this year, more of which I will touch on later. And indeed, this is a stance that's been taken by a number of councils across Scotland. There was a round robin across councils last night, and there's a wide diversity of treatments in reaction to these unique circumstances, but a good number are doing exactly how we're handling it. So the actual main budget will be considered by the council at the meeting on the 11th of March, a week tomorrow. I think on the back of that, it's pertinent to note, as we do at paragraph 3.1, that members have been heavily involved, both through formal meetings, whether council or executive, or through the member budget working group, or indeed through informal group meetings. So I think it's very much the case that members do have a good understanding of the broader context within which the council tax has been considered, notwithstanding the formal meeting to agree the budget will follow at a later date. In section 4.1 context, in para 4.1.1, the first paragraph there, we touch on the main elements that are causing this uncertainty. Clearly, there's a Scottish Government budget where we still don't have, evidently, an agreed position on the draft budget. And we know from previous years that in reaching an agreed position, there can be movement, positive movement, in the position for local government in terms of enhanced grant. That's perhaps less likely this year, but the point is we don't yet know. There's also the unique element impacting in this budget of the fiscal flexibilities, and again uncertainty prevails, which are likely to be resolved before the meeting on the 11th of March. There's still very much debate, discussion, engagement between local government and the Scottish Government. Notwithstanding the particular course of action that's been taken this year, which in the circumstances is reasonable and pragmatic, we should be mindful of the fact that separating determination of council tax from the wider budget is not the sensible or desirable way to do things. And of course, that's the reason why it's not been done this way before. There is, as members will be aware, one unresolved issue with the Scottish Government's proposal to fund a 3% or the equivalent of a 3% rise in council tax, and that's the issue of baselining. Local government has very much been seeking assurance that this would be baselined or integrated into future settlements. But as matters sit, this could change as part of the final Scottish Government budget, but as matters sit, the stance from the Scottish Government is that this will be considered separately as part of the ongoing settlement negotiations for the next round. But as is noted in para 413, during the currency of the previous council tax freeze, which lasted almost a decade, the annual impact was baseline. So we do have precedent there from which I think we can draw some comfort. Section 4.2 turns to the council tax itself. And I would say much of the content of Section 4.2 is to provide info to inform a possible discussion or decision around an increase in the council tax, in particular the tables in that section. But as I say, we do have a position where the council tax is the equivalent of a council tax increase is being funded by government grant, and certainly all those councils that have already agreed their budget have taken up this offer, and I'm not aware of any council that's looking to do anything different for those that are still to make a decision on this. Just by way of context, it's maybe worth noting that as things sit, we have the 5th lowest council tax rate in mainland Scotland, so that's a reference point. And perhaps the only other thing I would mention on the back of this section is the last paragraph, where there's still no movement, perhaps understandably by the emergence of pressures around COVID and different priorities, but there's been no real further movement in terms of consideration of a way forward for change or replacement to council tax. So that's somewhat been moved to the back burner. So with that, Provost, if I can just return you to the recommendation which is set out in section 2, whereby the council's asked to agree a council tax for the forthcoming financial year, taking account of the proposal and offer indeed from the Scottish Government to provide grant for a council tax freeze. I'll stop there, Provost, and happy to try and address any questions members may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go straight to the leader, Mrs. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost, and thanks to Mr. Smale. It's nice to know it's not just members that have technical issues with the laptops and the computers. This last year has been far from normal in so many ways, and bringing with it a host of challenges spanning across the whole spectrum of people's professional and personal lives. The unprecedented circumstances we find ourselves in extends to the departure from our normal budget setting process. However, it's the right thing to do, having been given the opportunity to freeze the council tax for this year, and the fact that the Scottish Government budget process has not been concluded, with negotiations still ongoing. Local government has played a critical role in the response to the pandemic, and as a result, local government finance has been in a state of flux for the past year as governments in seeking to manage to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. With my thanks, I have to go to Brian Smale, his finance team and the officers across the services for their diligence in managing the council's finances throughout the last year. And that's been no mean feat, with various funding streams coming in, earmarked and otherwise. Our focus as elected members has been on the health and welfare and well-being of our communities, and making sure that we make decisions in the best interests. With the pandemic having had an impact on everyone in every household, having the ability to help everyone to some degree with a no increase to the council tax, having been fully funded by Scottish Government, is again the right thing to do. Taking a little pressure off the financial impact, particularly on low-income working households. I know colleagues across parties have concerns that the Scottish Government have not yet confirmed the monies received from council tax freeze will be baselined, and it must be baselined if services are not to suffer detriment. And looking to the 2022-23 budget, removing an uncertainty in what will continue to be a challenging financial climate as the impacts of COVID-19 will be with us for a number of years as we seek to recover, would be very, very helpful at this time, and in allowing us to plan and taking away just one of the pressures that are in front of us. It recognises that while the Scottish Government have attempted to provide councils with a fair settlement within the budget available, public sector finances will continue to remain under significant pressure. We do, however, need to recognise that all governments are under financial pressures right now, and I have no doubt we will hear calls for more money for councils and that the Scottish Government is underfunding local government. But there's only so many ways you can cut the cake, but if there's not enough cake to go round, then you have to make the best of what you have. So please, I would make a plea to others, if you're going to do that, at least be constructive and say how you're going to fund that gap and where you're going to get that from, or what you're going to stop doing. Negotiations are continuing at a national level, and I expect an agreement will be reached with one or more of the opposition parties to secure the national budget in the next week. And in doing so, it's hoping there will be further clarity, particularly for local government, around the fiscal flexibilities on the PPP PFI funding. This is critical to enabling councils to use its is critical for councils to be able to use this flexibility to allow them to plan with some certainty around our recovery programmes over the next few years and to act as a catalyst to stimulate our economy. So with that, Provost, I move the following, and officers do have a copy of the motion that I'm going to now detail. One, that Council agrees to accept the proposal from the Scottish Government to freeze the council tax for 2021-22 as set out in the grant letter. And two, Council agrees to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance asking that she gives assurance that this year's council tax freeze, the equivalent of a 3% increase, be baseline for 22-23, recognising there will be longer term impacts as a result of the pandemic, thus giving an element of certainty at a time when public finances are under severe pressure. I would ask colleagues across the political divide, if they are content with that, a letter be prepared that would be signed by all three group leaders that could go to the Finance Secretary. On that, I move the motion, Provost, and thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I believe that your motion will be on screen shortly. Have you got a seconder for your Councillor Bowes?
Thank you, Provost. I'm going to keep it simple, and I will formally second the Leader of the Council's motion and reserve the right to come back in later.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll now go to Councillor Bissett. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. I think we would like 5 minutes to have a wee chat about that amendment. We've set up a breakout in Teams just to have a wee chat. But I'd just like to say, it has been a very difficult time the past year, and I certainly like to pay tribute to the teams that have managed to roll out the vaccine in such quick time and start to protect the population. And we've seen the infection rates coming down and less lives being lost. So I'm certainly grateful for that. It is a difficult time in local government, and we'll certainly know the finances but we think we need. And regarding the council tax freeze, it is an option that's available from the Scottish Government, and we've discussed that at length, and certainly within the Labour group we've agreed that we would freeze the council tax, certainly help families in the short term try and recover from this the economic shock we've got here. And so we've agreed to freeze the council tax, Provost, and the only concern is that it might not be baseline next year. So certainly I'm glad that addendums came forward here. Because if it's no baseline, we've got problems next year. So if we could have a short 5 minutes in Teams, Provost, I think we'd discuss that. But just to say, it's a difficult time, and I certainly am not going to discuss the budget till next week. whether the rights are wrong, whether underfunded or whatever, where the money is going to come from. But I think everybody understands we didn't come into local politics to make budget cuts. That's a fact. So if you would indulge us and give us 5 minutes to go into Teams, discuss this, Provost, we'll come back.
Certainly, there's also an opportunity for Councillor Kerr if he wants to take an opportunity with his colleagues as well. So we'll see you all back in about 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
I presume that will be emailed to us, Provost?
Will that be emailed, Jack? Yes, it's been emailed, yeah. I think that's it. We'll go back. Okay, we'll go back to Councillor Bissett. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Convener. We've had a wee chat around that, and I just want to make a couple of observations. The leader of the council mentioned that we've been, the last year, the council finances have been under pressure, but I'd just like to say on record that the past 14 years, the council finances have been under pressure. We've had 150 million cut for our budget and 76 million to come, so it's clearly time we were properly funded. And I'd just like to make a point on the council tax that it is a regressive tax and it's no equitable across society. And there was a time where Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond were going to reform the council tax, and I believe that was a promise made maybe 2009. So I think it's something, the council tax within itself needs to be looked at. So we don't disagree with the recommendations, Provost, and I think as one council we need to send that strong message to the Scottish Government that we do need it at baseline. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll go now to Councillor Kerr in relation to him and his colleagues on this issue. Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Provost. This has probably been the hardest years in my lifetime. It's probably the same as everybody else. It's only right that there's a freeze in the council tax this year at 3%. And we totally agree with the leader's addendum writing to the Finance Secretary. Because there are thousands of people out there struggling, really struggling, both with heating, food, money. So asking for the baseline for next year it allows us, if it's agreed, it allows us to tackle more of the issues. So we're in agreement with the addendum and we're quite happy to move forward with the other two groups on this. Provost, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very pleasing to see unanimity on this issue. Very sensible. So before we go back to the leader, is there anybody else want anything to say? I will just go back to Councillor Meiklejohn just to wind up. Councillor Meiklejohn.
Thank you, Provost. I think that we'll leave the discussions around the council tax and to why the alternative didn't come forward for another day, as that's not for the want of trying. Let's see, and perhaps looking at the history of what had happened there and why it didn't change is something that Councillor Bissett might want to take forward. We can debate for all we want next week in relation to the last 14 years the council tax being underfunded, but as I say, you've only got the cake that you've got and you have to make the best of it and going forward, and I'll look forward to the alternatives for funding local government that might well come forward. But I'm pleased that there's a cross-party support today to freeze the council tax and to work collectively to lobby the government around baselining the 3% the council tax for next year, because that would take one of the uncertainties away that I am sure that we will have many other challenges before us, but that would be something that would allow us to start to plan for the future. So other than that, Provost, I'm not going to say anything further. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So everybody's agreed to the recommendations plus the addendum that was put on by Councillor Meiklejohn. We agreed? Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. And
agreed.
Keep safe, everybody, and we'll see you back next week. Same time, same place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost.
Thank you.